Record.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to Yes Point 03, Health Sciences and Yoga. This is the third module in the ongoing Yes series. We have with us our principal facilitator, Dr. Ramesh Vichlani, and I am Aditi. You must be receiving emails from my ID. So during the course, if you have any difficulty in terms of accessing the live sessions or the YouTube sessions or any query regarding anything, you can always write to me and we will try and answer all your questions either in the live session or via emails. And we will be having our classes as you have received in your email, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. We will be having different faculties for the practical yoga class and also few guest speakers during the ongoing theory classes. And we hope that this series help us grow a little closer to our physical self and also much more connect to the deeper self. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aditi. And my dear brothers and sisters, the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch launched this project, the YES project, Yoga Education and Spirituality project, at the beginning of this year as a part of the 150th anniversary celebrations of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. We welcome you. Many of you have been with us earlier in the previous modules. I'm sure there are some new ones, and we are happy to welcome them to the YES family. We'll now start, as usual, with the invocation of the divine.
Om Tat Saviturvaram Rupam Jyotihi Parasya Dhimahi Yannaha Satyena Deepayet. Om Tat Saviturvaram Rupam Jyotihi Parasya Dhimahi Yannaha Satyena Deepayet. Om Tat Saviturvaram रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्।
That was an invocation through Sri Aurobindo's Gayatri in Prem Shila's voice. And this invocation is about praying for that divine light, which alone can show us the total truth. Next, I'll read out to you today's message from the mother. I know we have this perpetual calendar in the ashram, which has 366 leaves. It has dates, but no year. So you can use it year after year. And the mother has a way of sending the right message on the right day. The message for the 15th of September, which is today, says, purity in the cells can only be obtained through the conquest of desires. It is the true condition for good health. Sri Aurobindo and the mother have, in fact, said some very valuable things about health and disease. Now we'll go to a small selection from what Sri Aurobindo has said about the capacity of the body for self-healing in Tara Didi's voice.
Sri Aurobindo on the human body's tremendous capacity for self-healing. In one of his letters, Sri Aurobindo says, the body also has a consciousness of its own, and though it is a submental instrument or servant consciousness, it can disobey or fail to obey as well. In many things, in matters of health and illness, for instance, in all automatic functionings, the body acts on its own and is not a servant of the mind. If it is fatigued, it can offer a passive resistance to the mind's will. It can cloud the mind with tamas, inertia, dullness, fumes of the subconscious, so that the mind cannot act. The arm lifts itself, no doubt, when it gets the suggestion. But at first, the legs do not obey when they are asked to walk. They have to learn how to leave the crawling attitude and movement and take up the erect and ambulatory habit. When you first ask the hand to draw a straight line or to play music, it can't do it and won't do it. It has to be schooled, trained, taught, and afterwards it does automatically what is required of it. All this proves that there is a body consciousness different from the mind consciousness, which can do things at the mind's order, but has to be awakened, trained, made a good and conscious instrument. It can even be so trained that a mental will or suggestion can cure the illnesses of the body. In Thoughts and Aphorisms, Sri Aurobindo says, disease is needlessly prolonged and ends in death oftener than is inevitable, because the mind of the patient supports and dwells upon the disease of his body. The healthiest ages of mankind were those in which there were the fewest material remedies. It is not the medicine that cures so much as the patient's faith in the doctor and the medicine. Both are a clumsy substitute for the natural faith in one's own self-power, which they have themselves destroyed. The spirit within us is the only all-efficient doctor, and submission of the body to it, the one true panacea. God within us is infinite and self-fulfilling will. Unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him not as an experiment, with a calm, entire faith, thy ailments? Thou shalt find in the end that he exceeds the skill of 1,000,000 doctors. Man was once naturally healthy and could revert to that primal condition if he was suffered. But medical science pursues our body with an innumerable pack of drugs and assails the imagination with ravening hordes of microbes. It should take long for self-cure to replace medicine because of the fear, self-distrust, and unnatural physical reliance on drugs which medical science has taught to our minds and bodies and made our second nature. Medicine is necessary for our bodies in disease only, because our bodies have learned the art of not getting well without medicines. Even so, one sees often that the true moment nature chooses for recovery is that in which the life is abandoned as hopeless by the doctors. Medical science to the human body is like a great power which enfeebles a smaller state by the protection, or like a benevolent robber who knocks his victim flat and riddles him with wounds in order that he may devote his life to healing and serving the shattered body.
Those were indeed very powerful words in a powerful voice. Normally, a new course should begin with introductions, mutual introductions, but being an online session, we'll skip that. However, to feel a sense of togetherness, it will be good if as many of you who can switch on their videos so that we can also see the faces. It's the first day of a new course, and many new students have also joined. Rabindranath Tagore once said that every newborn child brings the assurance that God is still not tired of mankind. In the same way, every new batch of participants brings the assurance that you are still not tired of listening to this old man. You feel he still has something more to give. Today, our session is on the relationship between yoga and health sciences. And being a yoga course, for good order, let's start with what yoga is. Yoga is something which is very simple to explain, but very difficult to practice. In terms of explanation, it is essentially a process of change, a change that is radical, a change that is total, which affects all parts of the being, the body, the emotional part of the being, and the intellect. And because of the great sort of radical and revolutionary change which yoga looks at, we call it not just change, but transformation. And what happens in the process is, it's a long process, it's a stepwise process, it's not a one-time event. But what happens in the process is that gradually our imperfect instruments, the body and the mind, get more and more receptive to the light from our divine essence, the soul, so that they start transforming into their better versions. The body becomes more fit, more capable of self-healing. Our feelings become purified, educated, and the negative emotions tend to get displaced by their opposites, the positive, for example, greed by contentment, or anger by forgiveness. And our thoughts also get more and more purified and refined, and we develop a capacity to concentrate on an issue better, analyze it better, and so on. But apart from all this, something else is happening, and that is we undergo a change in our basic nature for the better, so that instead of being dominated by a separative consciousness, which is driven by the ego, we get more and more driven by a unitive, love-driven consciousness, which makes us feel a greater sense of oneness, interrelatedness to the rest of the creation. So that is what the process of yoga is about. Now, one might wonder what relationship this could have with health. In fact, there's a twofold relationship. Firstly, it may not be absolutely necessary, but it is certainly desirable that one should be in good health for the practice of yoga. So that is, good health enables us to practice yoga. And the other side of the story, that is the converse, is also true. Yoga leads to good health. Now, yoga is a discipline that was designed primarily for spiritual growth, not for getting healthy. But all the same, we do get healthy, and one can say that that is a fringe benefit, a byproduct of the path of yoga. And certainly, it helps in living any type of life, including a yogic life, which is about the transformation that we were talking about. So we can say that good health enables us to practice yoga better, and yoga leads to good health, even if it is as a byproduct. All the same, it is a welcome byproduct. Now let's look at this relationship between yoga and health in terms of yoga promoting health a little more in detail. And one can say that this follows a graded pattern depending upon the depth at which yoga is practiced. So starting at the simplest level, which is in fact the most popular, and that is looking at yoga as a set of postures and breathing practices. Now, that also improves health. And in fact, a lot of research studies are conducted by having a clear-cut, well-defined protocol of these physical practices of yoga and testing their effect on a set of subjects who may be healthy subjects or patients having some disease. But then in these studies, what is done is that the required number of participants are recruited for the study, and they are taught a set of practices which have to be done exactly in the same way by each one of them and torn completely out of context without any reference to the spiritual dimensions of yoga. That is what happens. On the other hand, in yoga, people are not recruited, they get initiated, they get drawn. And they don't follow a rigid path of the type that is required in a research study, everybody doing exactly the same thing in exactly the same way. But all the same, even with this type of a half-hearted approach, one finds that the effects are almost universally positive. People do improve in their health. If they had a disease, they get better. Not only they get better, they also feel better. Now, if this half-hearted approach to yoga can do so much, one can imagine how much more can be achieved if all our heart and soul is put into the process of yoga. Some other research studies look not at physical practices like asanas and pranayamas, but they look at the meditative practices. And usually the aim is to see whether it helps in stress reduction. And once again, although, I mean, those who have done particularly the previous modules would have realized that I, in fact, have a tendency to strongly denounce this relationship between meditation by itself and stress reduction, because expecting 20 minutes of sitting in silence to compensate for all the tension and turmoil of the day is asking for too much from too little. So unless we change our attitude to life, to the events and circumstances of life, meditation by itself will not help much. But all the same, in these research studies, even if meditation is thrown out of context, the subjects are not told to do anything else to alter their view of life, still we find that the results are quite positive. So this is sort of the simplest level at which one can start yoga and still get some health benefits. But then some research studies add to this also lifestyle changes in terms of diet, the duration for which a person sleeps, and the time at which he sleeps, and so on. If we add that, the benefits are still more. But then if we look at yoga in the most comprehensive way, we look upon it as a set of techniques, of course, like asanas, pranayamas, and meditation. But to that, we add that the person tries to live a life which is in keeping with the guidance provided by yoga. And the guidance provided by yoga is based on a spiritual discipline. And therefore, the person starts living his life differently. He undergoes a radical change in the way he lives his life and the way he views his life, in the type of goals and aspirations that he now has in life. Now, this type of a radical change brings about, again, an improvement in health, and the health benefits are much more. It leads to a tremendous increase in the capacity for self-healing, which you just heard about in Sri Aurobindo's words. And as a person approaches the point of perfection on the path of yoga, in fact, he is able to achieve health benefits which border on the miraculous. Why do we call them miracles? We call them miracles because they are outside the normal range of possibility. When we think of it with our ordinary mind, we don't even think it is possible, and therefore we feel that it is in some way, it is an exception. It has as if violated the normal rules of rationality, and something extraordinary has been achieved by an extraordinary person. But in fact, what is happening is that the laws that operate depend upon the level of consciousness that the person has achieved. And therefore, as the person starts approaching union with the divine, it is a higher law, the law of the divine, the law of the total truth that starts operating. And at that level, what can happen in terms of health benefits borders on the miraculous. So miracles can happen through yoga, but then conditions apply. And those conditions are met by very few. And those few who meet those conditions do not very often want to use those capacities to achieve this type of miraculous results, because they're not interested in prolonging the existence of this material frame. They don't want to outlive its utility. And they feel, well, the time has come in this life. I have done what was perhaps expected from me by the divine, and I'm ready to leave the body. And in the next life, I'll get a fresh new body to start with, and that will be much better. I'm ready to come back to this world 1,000 times if necessary to serve the divine, because that itself is a joy. So this person is not always interested in. For example, when Sri Aurobindo was asked during his terminal illness why he's not using his yogic powers to cure himself, he said just a few words: "You will not understand." Now we turn to yoga in relation to health sciences. Health sciences include anatomy and physiology, that is the structure and function of the body. But apart from that, also the science of disease, that is pathology, the science of germs, that is microbiology, and then clinical subjects like medicine, surgery, gynecology, obstetrics, and orthopedics, and so on and so forth. So all those things you know about. So we'll not go into all of them naturally, because this course is not to become doctors, and I'm not even competent to train a doctor right from the first year till the final year. No medical teacher is, but we'll all the same try to have an integral and integrated look at the major health sciences without necessarily partitioning them into disciplines, to try and understand the way the body functions in health and disease. Because after all, even a diseased person is more than 90% healthy. And secondly, the disease is also nothing but a deviation from the normal. So if we understand normal, we can understand the disease process. Something like, you can't have two separate sciences, one for good weather and one for bad weather. It's only if you understand good weather that you can also understand bad weather. So our focus will be on understanding health, because the body is basically geared for health, not for disease. And even in a diseased person, he's more than 90% healthy. And thirdly, the mechanisms which make this diseased person healthy once more are also a small variation on the mechanisms that exist in a healthy body. And therefore, our focus will be more on those subjects, those disciplines which deal with health rather than with disease. But then you might ask, why do we have to study them at all? Of course, understanding a disease helps in managing the disease. And this is particularly true of some diseases like diabetes. So understanding the processes that are going on in the body, understanding the disease process helps in managing many of the diseases better and also preventing them. But strictly speaking, understanding health sciences, at least the details of health sciences, into some of which we'll go in this course, is not necessary for staying healthy. Just as to understand the intricacies of the engine in a car is not necessary for driving the car. So we can keep the car in pretty good shape and take it for servicing. In the same way, you can take your body also to a service station, maybe for an Ayurvedic massage or something. So that will be like servicing. You can do that and stay healthy. You don't have to understand what is going on in the body. But all the same, understanding it does help. It satisfies our curiosity in many ways. It helps us in preventing and treating many diseases in a much better way. And last but not least, it is also a route to the divine. You'll say, how? It works as a route to the divine because when you start understanding the human body more and more, you start marveling at how wonderfully we are made. And you get drawn to the Creator who has created this marvelous machine. So you become an admirer of the divine, you become a devotee of the divine, just because you realize how wonderfully we are made. For example, when you look at the structure of the body and look at the different joints, now that itself is a marvel. Many of them act like levers. More than that, many of them combine rigidity with flexibility in a wonderful way. And many of them are able to perform a variety of movements in all sorts of directions without getting dislocated normally. Now, all these are marvels of engineering from which the engineers have, in fact, can learn and have learned a lot. Then, the way the body has several places where it multiplies surface area where necessary, where a transfer or exchange has to take place. So within a compact space, how to increase the surface area. So if you have a straight line from here to here, and you have a flat surface like that, it will have a certain surface area. But within the same length available, if you have folds like this, the surface area goes up. And the tremendous increase in the surface area that has been achieved, say in the intestine where the digested food has to get transferred, is enormous. At different levels, as we shall see in one of the subsequent sessions, there is a 600-fold multiplication in the surface area just because of these folds in the intestines at different levels. Then if you look at this surface where the air has to be exchanged in the lungs, the air sacs, where the final exchange takes place, if you were to spread out all those air sacs, you'll get an area of about 100 square meters, which is roughly the area of a tennis court. All that is packed within the two lungs. And then if you were to look at the nephrons in the kidney, they are so thin that they're microscopic. You can't even see the tubules in the nephron with the naked eye, barely visible maybe, but by and large not visible. In such thin structures, which are so long, we have 2 million of them in the two kidneys. If you stretch out each nephron and these thin tubules, which would otherwise look so fragile and, how can you have them at all and doing something in the body? If you stretch them all out, they go up to a length of about 100 kilometers. So roughly the distance from Delhi to Mathura. So that is the type of arrangements we have in the body. Then you start studying function. And you find that there is again a tremendous degree of regulation. It's not that the functions of the body are static in nature and the lungs are doing this and the heart is doing this and so on and so forth. If you are, say, in the month of June, in a desert, the temperature outside is nearing 50 degrees centigrade. You put the thermometer in the mouth, it reads about 37 degrees centigrade. You go to the mountains, and the temperature is near freezing. You put the thermometer in the mouth, the temperature is still about 37. Now, how is this temperature kept constant, although outside it is so different? Because of the regulatory mechanisms of the body. Regulatory mechanisms which don't come into play when you expose yourself to heat or cold. In fact, they start acting in anticipation. Start acting in anticipation of what will happen if something is not done in this type of a new environment. So they're anticipatory controls. And the engineers can learn and have learned a lot about what they call servo mechanisms from what is happening in the human body. And they still have to improve upon some of the mechanisms which exist in the body when it comes to this type of controls. Then, the tremendous amount of reserve that we have. Engineers build in all types of reserves that if this is the expected load on a bridge, then you have a threefold capacity. Even if the load is 3 times, the bridge should not break. So 67% is a reserve. Only 1/3 of the capacity will be used normally. You have a similar reserve also in the body. One can live on only 20% of the liver. 80% is reserve. The normal heart pumps 5 liters of blood in a minute, but it is capable of pumping about 25 liters, which means that if the function of the heart is compromised, when the person is at rest and doing only moderate activity, even if his heart has now the capacity to pump only 10 or 15 liters per minute, he will not even notice that anything has gone wrong. And the same way, one can live on 1 kidney. You've seen people can donate a kidney and still live a healthy life. So this is what we call physiological reserve. So this is a concept which is used not only in construction of buildings and bridges. It's a concept which has already been used in this machine. But then this is what happens in the body of an average person with an average level of consciousness. And we saw that in the reading from Sri Aurobindo that the body, in fact, has a tremendous capacity to heal. And if we practice yoga and look at it as a path of spiritual progress and let health be only a byproduct, in fact, the gains can be much more, which means that not only the heart will be able to beat instead of pump instead of 25 liters, maybe 40 liters per minute, not only at that level, but what will also happen, can happen is that the body can make full use of the pranic force, the life force which we have in the body, so that all the hidden capacities in matter which constitutes our body can be brought out, because of all the body or the matter, the material of which we are made, is also a manifestation of the divine. The consciousness of the divine is hidden in it. Therefore, it has infinite capacity. And it is only because normally we are constituted in such a way that we have a consciousness of ignorance, that only a small part of this consciousness is being manifested in the body. But then the more you enlighten it with the light from the divine essence, you find that the greater becomes this capacity to heal and the reserve in every respect goes up. So one might say that just as there's a physiological reserve, there's also a spiritual reserve that we have. And yoga may be looked at as a way of tapping our spiritual reserve. Now, when you go to biochemistry, a sister discipline of physiology, where you study function at a molecular level, you are struck by the degree of miniaturization that has been achieved. In molecules which are not seen even with an electron microscope sometimes, you find that in those molecules are hidden those mechanisms by which they can interact with each other selectively. And what are the forces that make them get attracted to each other or get repelled from each other, and in a certain way as to lead to meaningful reactions which can be orchestrated, which can be like, a cascade, one leading to second, second leading to third, third leading to the fourth reaction. So like an orchestra, they play in a sequence to work out a certain mechanism's body. Now, it is happening at the level of those molecules which cannot be seen in an electron microscope, and basically working on two principles: their shape and their charge. So positive charges, same type of charges repel each other, opposite charges attract each other. This is one mechanism. And then the shape. Even these submicroscopic molecules have a shape, and their shapes are such that with great specificity, they can lock into each other either to carry out a function or to block a function. So like a lock and a key, it's happening in these structures which are so tiny and minute. Now, such is the machine that we have been blessed with. And if after studying all this, one is not struck by the glory of the divine who has constructed it, we are just studying a bit of it, don't understand all of it, and still there is so much to admire. And in any case, using something is the simplest. So using our body is the simplest. Learning a little about how it functions is a little more difficult, and that's what we are going to do in this course. But then the one who constructs it for the first time, you can only imagine you will become a devotee. Huh? So just as Arjun became a devotee after getting knowledge from Krishna, any of us can become a devotee after understanding the human body. So that is one way we can say that study of health sciences can itself bear route to the divine. Now I'll change gears and talk a little bit about the history of medicine. And that again would be relevant because we'll be talking about both the modern system of medicine, commonly called allopathy, and a bit about the traditional Indian system of medicine, which is Ayurveda, in this course. And why they differ, why their approaches differ, can be understood to some extent in terms of the history of these two disciplines. Now, in fact, most allopaths would not, that is the system in which I was educated. So I know a little more about it than about Ayurveda. Ayurveda I have just sort of picked up here and there through self-study and observation. But allopathy is this discipline in which I was educated. Most allopaths would not like to be called allopaths. Why? Because allo means foreign, and pathy means disease. So this is a system in which the treatment is foreign to the disease, unrelated to the disease. And who gave us this name? The person who founded homeopathy, Hahnemann. So he called his system homeopathy. That is, here, the treatment is related to the disease. It's similar to the disease. Whereas here is this rotten system in which he was also educated, but for which he developed a dislike. He said, this is the system in which treatment has nothing to do with the disease. It is foreign to the disease, and therefore he called it allopathy. So the name was given by the founder of homeopathy, and that is the name that has stuck. We don't even think why we are called allopaths. But anyway, that apart, now going to the history. You can say modern medicine is essentially the product of Greek medicine, which flourished during the 500 years from about 500 BC to the beginning of the Christian era. Those 500 years were the heyday of Greek culture, and that is when Greek medicine also developed. And it was developed not only by the father of modern medicine, Hippocrates, who lived around 400 BC, but also by others like Aristotle and so on, who were philosophers. Those days, there was no strict division between a philosopher and a physician, and sometimes not even between a philosopher, a physician, and a mathematician. So they could all be, the same person could be a polymath. So that was one era in which modern medicine developed. And then it was, of course, preserved during the Roman period, from the beginning of the Christian era till about the 7th century, for about 700 years. And then the Roman Empire fell, the European civilization fell, and the result was things came to a standstill. But however, there was another alternate region in which things flourished, and that was the Arab countries. Islam was founded around the 7th century, and by the 10th century or so, the Arabian Empire had expanded. And when a region is doing well in terms of having power and economics and so on, then it also has the luxury of indulging in scholarship. So that was the period when the Arabs indulged in the scholarship. But then, to indulge in scholarship of the type that we had in the Greeks, that is scholarship which is driven by healthy curiosity, that is very difficult to achieve in for hundreds of years. And that is why the Romans could only preserve what the Greeks had achieved with 700 years at their disposal, from the beginning of the Christian era till the 7th century, 700 years, an enormous power at their disposal. Nothing much of great value was created by the Romans. And in the same way, with 600 to 700 years available to the Arabs from about the 10th century to about the 16th century, nothing really original was created by the Arabs either. However, these periods served many purposes. Firstly, during the Roman period, one physician who migrated from Greece to Rome, Galen, who lived in the 2nd century AD, compiled all the knowledge that was available at that time and translated into Latin. So now Greek medicine was available in Latin. And when the Arabs came up, they took this material and translated into Persian. And they did one more thing. Being geographically situated between Europe and India and China, they also traveled to India and China, took Ayurveda from here, took some Chinese medicine from China, and created an amalgam. So nothing original, but all the same, the synthesis was important and came up with what is called Unani medicine today. So Unani medicine has Greek medicine, Ayurveda, and some Chinese medicine as well. Now they translated into Persian. Now translation from Greek to Latin, from Latin to Persian, any translation is a disaster. It can't do justice to the original. And therefore, what they created went through this double disaster of two translations, from Greek to Latin and from Latin to Persian, and also in case of Indian and Chinese medicine, from Sanskrit to Persian and from Chinese to languages to Persian. So it went through all these disasters, but still the knowledge got preserved. The knowledge was preserved, and therefore during European Renaissance in the 16th century, they had something to fall back upon. Of course, they could fall back upon the works of Galen, but they also turned to the Arabs and took also what the Arabs had done. And that was the beginning of modern medicine in the 16th century or so. And you'll be surprised that modern medicine really did not develop much during the first few hundred years of the European Renaissance, because that was the period during which basic sciences like physics and chemistry developed. And it is only on the shoulders of physics and chemistry that biology could develop. And it's only on the shoulders of biology that medicine could develop. And therefore, till even the beginning of the 20th century, modern medicine was doing some very stupid things in the name of rationality. It had not developed much. Modern medicine is essentially the product of what happened, say, around the period of 1920 onwards. That was the period when we discovered the antibiotics. That's the period when we discovered the germs. That's the period when we discovered vitamins. That's the period when we discovered insulin and other hormones. That's the period during which anesthesia became safe. That's the period during which X-rays became possible, and therefore you could peep into the body. That's the period when biochemical tests, which refined our diagnosis, became possible. So it was essentially the product of the last 100 years or so. Till 100 years ago, modern medicine was doing some very stupid things in the name of rationality. No, rationale doesn't always lead us to very good conclusions. For example, you'll be surprised to know that there was a belief that walnuts are good for the brain because the surface of a walnut has a resemblance to the surface of the brain. Now, this is what modern medicine believed in. Paracelsus. That's what he said. Now, very logical, rational, but then rational doesn't, and even more surprising, there were periods during, for the same disease, leeches were used to suck out the blood, and for the same disease in another era of modern medicine, blood transfusions were given. Both were done, and both had a rationale. And one of the most surprising things was they didn't know how epilepsy is caused. They don't know the relationship between the nervous system and the epilepsy. In epilepsy, the hand is shaking, so do an amputation, chop off the hand or the arm. So the body, the part which is shaking, that can be amputated, that will cure the disease. All this has been done in modern medicine. But the last 100 years have been different. This has been a glorious period of modern medicine, and it has so revolutionized diagnosis and treatment that it has completely hypnotized the world. Those parts of the world which could benefit the most from it, to start with, Europe and North America, they experienced a tremendous increase in life expectancy as a result of these advances. But then there came a time when the hope that all diseases would be conquered through this approach was not realized. Life expectancy went up. People started dying at an older age, but of a different set of diseases. Infectious diseases and nutritional deficiencies and endocrine diseases like diabetes were conquered more or less. But then now people were dying of heart disease and stroke and cancer and so on, and complications of diabetes. So these became the major killers. And these did not lend themselves to the same approach through which those conquests had been achieved. And that is when modern medicine again started turning to ancient Indian disciplines like yoga. Because these disciplines have exactly what led to these diseases of the modern civilization. Basically, a faulty lifestyle with which is coupled and related mental stress. And ancient disciplines like yoga combined a superb lifestyle, the finest lifestyle ever discovered by mankind, with very potent, infallible prescriptions for lasting mental peace. So both these things which were contributing to these diseases, the antidote to that was found in disciplines like yoga, and that's how yoga started getting incorporated into modern medicine. And in fact, if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll find that I did a series on the pioneers in mind-body medicine, which will give you a better idea of how it happened. I think we have talked about 5 pioneers: Norman Cousins, Dean Ornish, Bernie Siegel, Larry Dossey, and Herbert Benson. So 5 of them interweaving their personal history, how they turned to it with what they have done. So that was the period, say from about 1950 onwards, that modern medicine again started looking at, after 30 or 40 years of euphoria, during which all these conquests took place. Once again, modern medicine started turning to ancient Indian disciplines. But then the beauty of modern medicine is that when it realized what it cannot do and found something that could help, it incorporated it to it. So that is the beauty of science. Science realizes that we don't know everything, and therefore we are ready to accept more, no matter which source it comes from, maybe test it at experimental level, but then if we find that the experiments validate it, we incorporate it into our science. So that is what modern medicine has done. Now coming to Ayurveda. Ayurveda is even much older than modern medicine. And in fact, the earliest text perhaps is Atharva Veda, which is within the Atharva Veda. Ayurveda is an Upaveda, you can say, of Atharva Veda. So that is where which means at least about 5,000 years old. That is where we find the first. But then after that, we have other texts which have further elaborated upon the science of Ayurveda, from Charaka and Susruta and Vagbhata and Kashyap and so on. So we have other texts in Ayurveda which came later, which expanded it. But, and this knowledge, but there's a difference in the source of this knowledge. Whether you look at Greek medicine, or whether you look at the medicine that developed during the European Renaissance, it was the result of intense intellectual activity. Intellectual activity at a higher level, intellectual activity of a very refined kind, but all the same intellectual activity. Whereas Ayurveda is a part of the Vedas. Vedas were the creation of the rishis. The rishis who saw the truth. They didn't investigate at an intellectual level. They worked at a level higher than the intellect, much higher than the intellect. They had a contact with their soul. They had a contact with the divine. And therefore, they received the inspiration for this knowledge. This knowledge also came to them from that higher source. So the source was itself was different. The mechanism was different. They didn't have to do the type of experiments that modern medicine has been doing to be able to validate that knowledge. It got validated on its own. The knowledge came to them. It was truth because it was revealed by the divine. And then it was got tested over thousands of years by putting it into practice in the society. So thousands of years of experimentation, natural experimentation has been going on through the practice of Ayurveda, so much so that in countries like India, where in fact concerted efforts were made to even destroy and kill Ayurveda, Ayurveda still survived as folk knowledge. At least the rudiments of it, some basics of it survived as folk knowledge. We have all heard our grandmothers tell us about in this season what to have, what not to have, what food to have with which food and which food to avoid, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the aspects of Ayurveda survived as folk knowledge, and it has been tested through this. And I'll not go into the details, and this is also one reason why all Ayurveda cannot be tested. Modern methods of modern science are not only inadequate, they're inappropriate for testing all Ayurvedic knowledge. And if you try to test it by that method, validating one little bit by modern methods can be more than a lifetime's work for a big team of scientists. And therefore, to validate the whole of Ayurveda, you can go on for another few centuries. So what is this then sort of practical way of doing it? Just use what works. It works, and use it. So that should be our approach to Ayurveda, because it has a rationale of its own. Its rationale may not suit us in terms of modern science, but there's an internal consistency there, which means those things are consistent with each other when you look at them. So that is the source of Ayurveda, and that is the reason why the approach in Ayurveda is quite different from that in so-called allopathy, or what should perhaps better be called modern scientific medicine. However, all areas of knowledge have a grain of truth, and modern medicine has a lot of truth today, which has accumulated over the last 100 years and which has helped mankind a lot. And the time is now ripe for, once again, a synthesis of traditional knowledge and modern scientific knowledge along the same lines as Sri Aurobindo worked out the synthesis of yoga. So that is the type of synthesis that we should now try to aim at, and to some extent it is happening, and the lead is being taken by modern medicine. As I said, that's getting incorporated into modern, it's becoming an integral part of modern medicine. The lead is being taken by modern medicine because it is open to new things. Whereas systems like Ayurveda tend to be rather closed. A system by its very definition is something which takes what the system says as the last word. And therefore they tend to be closed to new approaches. And therefore they are not able to participate in this synthesis to the extent that an open system is able to do. I'm just being totally dispassionate. I'm an admirer of both modern medicine and Ayurveda, but as you can see, I mean, one has to look at things in a dispassionate way. Unless we do that, we'll not be able to do justice to what is desirable. And what is desirable in the greater interests of mankind is a synthesis of different streams of knowledge. So that is what we need. Now, we are coming to the conclusion of today's session. And you might have realized that we all the time have been saying in our publicity material that this is a yoga course with a difference. And those who have done the previous modules would have realized, yes, it is a yoga course with a difference. And those who have heard today would have also started anticipating that this course will be on health sciences also with a difference. Health sciences will not be taught the way they are taught in an average medical college. I'll of course keep in mind that many of you may not have a medical background, so it will be brought down to the level of the general public. At the same time, the approach will be quite different from the textbook approach or the approach that you may find in an average course on teaching yoga, because most courses on teaching yoga have a module on anatomy and physiology, but that's not the way we will be doing it. It will be anatomy and physiology and other health sciences with a difference once again. And I know this timing at which we do these classes is in a way inconvenient. It's working hours in India and Europe, and it's perhaps only in some part of the United States that well, India's working hours, in Europe it's too early in the morning, and it's only in some part of the United States that it may be evening or late in the evening when they can maybe watch. But all the same, that is not a problem because we put the class recordings of all these classes on our YouTube channel, which you can watch anytime you like at your own convenience. So if you have missed a class, or those who are not able to attend the classes because of the timings, can always go to our YouTube channel and watch the class recordings. And we have separate playlists for each course, a separate playlist for theory classes and a separate playlist for practical classes. So with that, thank you all again. And I'll stop here and pass on to Aditi to invite questions, to see if there are any questions in the chat, and to close the session.
If you have any question, you can simply unmute yourself and ask or write in the chat box so we can take it during the session. There's more like an information question. How will be the practical sessions be conducted?
The practical sessions will also be online, and the practical component in this course will be a little less than in the previous ones. In the previous, it was say 2 classes theory, 2 practical classes. In this one, it is 3 theory classes and 1 practical class every week. And the focus will be on variations of the postures, making them difficult, making them easy, and adapting them to children. How to teach children these yogic practices to make them more interesting for them. So these will be some of the things which will come up in the practical classes, and they'll be all online. The teachers will be doing it from their own place, as Vidya did in the previous course.
Do we have documents or handouts in this course?
No, as you might have seen that we do not have documents and handouts. Instead, we have books. Well, this is one course for which we do not have a specific book. But in the next class, I'll show you 3 different books from which you can choose depending upon your background. One of them is for the general public, one is for nursing and medical students, and one is for medical students and teachers. So there are 3 books, but not specifically for this course. In the previous courses, there were books which are more or less specific to this course. That is still something, a project for the future, and you can pray to the mother that one day that also materializes.
Is this a certificate course?
No, it's not a certificate course. Like the previous 2 modules, again, the certificate will not be given. And this is a sort of purely a curiosity-driven sort of course. You have the curiosity, you attend it. We monitor, we do not monitor attendance, and we do not assess anybody. So naturally, certification is not possible. However, we will have a 5th module, which will be physical, which will be 1 or 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks in duration, during which some assessment of what you learned in these 4 modules will be there, and then the certificate will be given. But then again, a certificate, which will be our own certificate, not recognized by any accreditation body.
Next question is, how can I correlate therapeutic yoga with modern medical science?
Well, to some extent, it will come up in this module, to some extent in the next one, yes, 0.04, which will focus on lifestyle diseases.
That's one for the chat box questions. If still anybody has any questions, you can just unmute and ask if you wish. All right, then I think maybe it's a first introduction session. We are just getting used to what is coming for us in the next few classes. So the questions will also increase as we move forward. So thank you everyone for being present for the first session. And tomorrow we will have a second session, an introduction to anatomy and physiology. Same time, and the session for today will be uploaded on our channel. As yes. Okay, yes, the books will be introduced by Dr. Bijlani tomorrow as we begin, so that we get the session started. Today was more of an introduction of what are we going to study. So that will be all for today. And just one last question in the chat box. Why will people choose yoga rather going to medical trials? And I think that you can take up in the coming sessions, or you would like to answer now.
You can answer it even now, briefly. It's not an either-or approach. That is one of the mistakes people commonly make, that now that I have two alternatives available, which one should I choose? And one simple example that I generally give is that of high blood pressure. High blood pressure today is the result of what the person has been doing for the last 20 to 30 years, for an unhealthy lifestyle and mental stress. Now, if he goes to the modern medical physician who practices modern medicine, he'll probably tell him that these are the pills, they'll bring your blood pressure down and you have to take them for the rest of your life. And they do bring down the blood pressure promptly. They act at the end result. The blood vessels have become narrow, and that's what's raised the blood pressure. It widens the blood vessels. So the blood pressure comes down. But then he has to continue taking the pills. He goes to a person who's practicing one of these ancient disciplines like yoga. He's told that if the basic cause is your unhealthy lifestyle and mental stress, I'll tell you what a healthy diet is and how to get rid of stress. Even if the person, that's a big if, even if the person succeeds in modifying, making a radical change in the lifestyle and following all that strategy, you do not expect through this type of a change what has happened over the last 20 to 30 years to disappear in a day, which means that approach will take time. Until that time has been given, the pills which he has been given are also serving a purpose. They're keeping the blood pressure down so that it will prevent stroke from happening. So that is buying him time. But if he also makes this radical change in the lifestyle, learns how to live a stress-free life, in spite of the external circumstances, his happiness becomes independent of external circumstances, then over the next 5 to 10 years, he'll find that his blood pressure starts coming down. The same dose of the pills takes the blood pressure to a level lower than normal, and then the physician will start reducing the dose and may eventually tell him, now you don't need the pill because your blood pressure has become normal. So the two approaches are not mutually exclusive. And still, to make it simpler, you understand it like this. Suppose a car has broken down. Huh? And then what you do is you get hold of a few boys to push it to the workshop. Now the boys who are pushing it are doing the job of the pills. That's necessary. But once it gets to the workshop, it will take time, but then only the car will be properly repaired. Okay.
Then we can just end today's session with a minute of silence, and see you all tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for joining today.